Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about this colossal foobar that happened over at Microsoft and how it's going to affect people. If you had a Microsoft account, you were very likely affected by this because this hack allowed the hackers to access every single email address that was part of Microsoft's Office 365 service. So it was a lot of people. But I'm also going to highlight the risk that you're taking when you rely and trust on cloud services, and that none of them are ever actually truly secure, and that you could do everything right and you can still get hacked because of a screw up somewhere else along that someone else made that was absolutely not your fault in any way. So I'm just going to give you the cliff notes to this, and then we're going to move on to some different privacy services to consider and some details about them. So this article was published just a couple of days ago, and I've been hearing about this for a while, and I'm going to cover some details. Microsoft had said that their stuff had been hacked a little while back, and I've been following the news about it, but this detailed some more of what was going on behind the scenes. So they suspect that it was Russian state-sponsored hackers, which I'll cover this here more in just a moment. But this was a really colossal foobar for Microsoft. In an article here, it says on Thursday's update, Microsoft's officials said as much, although they used language that largely obscured the extent of the major blunder. So it talked about how this threat group, Midnight Blizzard, compromised all these email accounts using OAuth. That means open authorization. That's where you can share information between things like web apps without sharing passwords. So web apps would be something like Google Docs, for example. And basically what this means here is that they used an admin account to be able to do this. And so what this was they said a legacy non-production test tenant account. But then later on down in the article, it talks about how this had access to production. So I'm not sure where they came up with this for those that aren't familiar with IT lingo. So prod means production, dev means development. And when you have accounts like this that have these wide admin access, it's not monitored, there's no two-factor authentication on anything like that. And in this case, there was no multi-factor authentication on the account. This should have never been on a production server. And so I mentioned here, not mentioned in the blog, to grant OAuth access to read all mailboxes has happened here. You need to be the tenant admin. There's not a vulnerability being used here, as Microsoft would have mentioned it for sure. So somebody made a pretty big config error in production to allow a test tenant app to be used to grant checks notes reading of any mailbox. And I realize mistakes are made. This could have been a newer group of IT employees, or maybe somehow it just slipped through. I have a hard time believing that someone wouldn't have caught this at some point, because it says right here, it's a bit like having a domain admin user for the production system, except it's a test domain with no security, no multi-factor authentication, no firewalls, no monitoring, etc. The translation of this is a domain admin user has full administrative privileges to all devices connected to a network, including the domain controller, an Active Directory that stores credentials and creates new accounts. As the most powerful users on a network, they should be cordoned off and rarely, if ever, made part of a production system. Allowing such accounts to go unprotected by strong passwords and other security measures would make the lapse worse. Anyway, so I'll drop a link to this article down below so you can read it if you want to. To kind of sum everything up, it was at least suspected to be a Russian state-sponsored group. And what I heard from an article, I think it was about a month ago or so that it came out now, was that the hackers were looking to see what Microsoft had on the Russians. I don't know how much truth there is to that, if that's actually the case. It sounds like that's what they were looking for, so I don't know if people's emails, if they copied everyone's emails that they had access to, because they had access to the entire Office 365 emails. So anyone that uses Microsoft Outlook, the cloud service, means that the Russians had access to all of their emails. So we don't know if any of those emails were copied or anything like that, but this is a very good example of, like I said, you could do everything right, and through no fault of your own, something can get screwed up and you can have all of your personal information get stolen. You can deal with a big ass headache trying to clean stuff up. Now, what the point of this video is to talk about, I'm trying to convince people to take their security and privacy more seriously. That's the point of a lot of these videos that I make. And this is just one more example that when you rely on someone else's servers, when it's not your servers, it's not your keys, typically. Now, typically that saying applies to the world of cryptocurrency. Like if it's put on someone else's exchange, that you don't ever have actually full access or full control over your cryptocurrency. But the same thing applies to this, because if you're putting your files or emails on someone else's server, you don't truly have full control over it. And I realize there's some nuance to that, but I'll get to that in a minute. There's something else I want people to consider. So, taking the email side of it, because people are using these cloud suites, and part of the cloud suite is people want to use it for file backups, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And I do think people should have backups because there's time where you could lose all your shit and you could have years of stuff just disappear. There's something else here. So, there's this article that came out earlier last year talking about how Microsoft was scanning the inside of password protected zip files for malware. I will also link this one below. I'm not going to read through the whole thing. Basically, what it is that Microsoft started scanning through or scanning the files being uploaded to the cloud service. And if it saw something get uploaded with a password protected zip, is it would try different passwords until it could open the archive. And there's multiple examples in here of things like security researchers uploading stuff that was password protected, but it had malware samples that they were testing. And then Microsoft would look at it. So, like it says right here, it says if you mail yourself something and type something like zip password is Sophos, zip up iCar and zip password it with Sophos, it'll find the password, extract, and find, and feed MS detection. And then there is also another example here where a user said that he was having a zip file flagged because he had, like I said, some malware samples that he was testing, and he put a password on the archive. So Microsoft is actively looking at everything gets uploaded. Now, it says a Google representative said the company doesn't scan password protected files, though it does flag them when users receive such a file. Now, here's the thing. People might not be aware of this. When you use Google for email, I noticed this years ago when I used to get some statements that came through the email of like, hey, your payment's due on this thing. And then I would get a notification on my Android saying, hey, you have a bill that's coming up here. And it's like, I never put any sort of reminder or anything into Google, but Google, Microsoft, Dropbox, all these guys are looking at your shit. If you're uploading stuff to their servers, they have full access to it because there is no zero knowledge encryption being used. And in the context of emails, we'll talk about that. For files, you can use different suites to potentially work around that. And then for Dropbox, just because people might have heard about Dropbox and Boxcryptor doing a business deal a while back, this only applies to people that are on the business paid plans. So if you are on the personal plan, you do not have zero knowledge encryption for your files. And the thing is like in this case, if it's something really sensitive because Boxcryptor is closed source and no one can actually see what's going on with that suite, I mean, you can't really fully trust that they're doing zero knowledge encryption on that either. So now that I've got all of those points done, let's cover ways to work around this, some different software and tools that you can use to work with around this stuff. So we'll cover the storage side of things here first. Now, your standard options are Google Drive, OneDrive, and Dropbox. That's what most people are aware of. Now, what I've done, so I did a video a while back talking about Cryptomator. Now, if you're using Cryptomator and you're uploading something, so if you put a password protected volume from like Cryptomator into something like Google Drive, OneDrive, or Dropbox, you're completely okay because as long as you're using a strong password on Cryptomator and you're uploading all of your files through there, I mean, obviously don't ever lose your password because then you lose access to all your files. There's no way to recover it with zero knowledge encryption. But Cryptomator's good. If you're just uploading files here and there, let's say you're using one of these services and you're just uploading files here and there that are sensitive that you don't want people to read, you can do either 7-zip will allow you to do password protected archive. 7-zip is okay. PicoCrypt would be the better option. Like if let's say you just have like a dozen files that you need to encrypt because you don't want the cloud services to be snooping through your stuff, then what you could do is use PicoCrypt. Now, if you want to look at some alternatives, there are some different ones that are available. Now, I haven't used Mega in a while. The last I heard was that Mega was supposed to be like a super privacy focused service where you could upload files. I don't know if that's still the case or if they have started clamping down on that and now if they're like potentially looking through people's files. But I know for a while there, that used to be a pretty decent option. I think you used to get, maybe you still do get like 50 gigabytes of free storage on the free plan before you have to start paying for stuff. So Mega might be one option where as long as they still have like good encryption, if it's zero knowledge, that you could use that. Trustrit, this is a pretty expensive option compared to the others. Now, like, it's not super expensive, but it's meant more for businesses. You can use it as a personal plan. It's based out of Switzerland. It is owned by, I believe it's the Swiss Postal Service, but I could be wrong on that. Similar to how Quad 9 is also owned by the Swiss Postal Service. Intressrit does have zero knowledge encryption, but like I said, you have to pay a little extra. You don't get as good of storage. There's file upload limits on like the sizes that you can upload. But Trusted is a pretty good option. Sync is another one. I've heard Sync is zero knowledge encryption. Again, it's not something that you can really ever prove. This is kind of like Dropbox, except that they advertise themselves as being much more privacy focused. Now, just so people are aware, this is a service that is based in Canada. And so that means it is obviously part of Five Eyes. So whether or not they really hold up to the zero knowledge encryption, not looking through your stuff, I mean, no one ever can really prove that, but that is one option that's available. Proton Drive is probably about the best out of all these options that are available. Now, there was a court case that came up, and there was some false news that was being spread. It was like basically fake news that was being spread about the Proton service. It was something about Proton email. There were some articles that came up, I believe it was last year, talking about how the FBI sent over a search warrant to Proton, and they gave up a bunch of user info. There's full details of that available on Proton's website. Long story short, those news articles that were being circulated, a lot of them were putting out a bunch of bullshit. It did not include the full context of things. Proton did not actually, because they are zero knowledge encryption, they didn't actually give up like the person's emails or anything like that. They couldn't give anything up except the recovery email was what was given up, because it was also tied to the person's Twitter account. So Proton is a good option, and it has been tested in court basically. Now, don't use the VPN and do dumb shit, because if Five Eyes really want to, then they'll get you. So don't do anything that's going to get them to come after you. And then the other option, if you're looking at if you wanted to do something that's self-hosted, you're willing to go through a little bit of trouble setting stuff up, Nextcloud is an option as well. But for a person that just wants something easy, straightforward to use, either one of these services with Cryptomator, because Cryptomator is really easy to use. I did it, like I said, I did a video of setting it up and encrypting files and all that. Or you could just, if you don't want to deal with having to run everything through an encrypted volume first, you could just use Proton Drive. It's very simple. Now let's cover some email stuff, because email, when it comes to messaging, email is really not the greatest. It's not the most secure thing out there, because it is there's so many nuances to it. And if you really need secure messaging, it's not going to be the best option that's out there. Now, by default, basically like the common options are these days, is you have Gmail, Office 365, Outlook, Exchange, or Yahoo. Now, none of these are private whatsoever. Whenever you are sending or receiving emails through these services, your emails are being scanned for any type of information. And it's gotten really bad now that AI is here. You know, they're feeding all this stuff into these LLM models. So what they're doing is they're just mass collecting data and feeding it into there. So the privacy issues, I think, are going to get worse in the coming years, especially with some other stuff. I'll make some videos covering that later to go into more detail, but to get out of the scope of this video. Now, there's a couple different options for email here. So if you want to continue to use email, but you're looking for something more privacy focused, Proton Mail, so it's part of the Proton suite. I think you can just do Proton Mail by itself, and they also have the free option that's available. You don't have to pay for this. You can just get extra storage if you pay for it, and then get access to the other stuff like the VPN and the cloud storage. Proton Mail is a good option. Tutanota and Skiff are also both good encrypted email options. There are differences between these three, so if you want to get one over the other, just make sure you research the differences. Whatever is most important to you, look into it and figure that out. If you want like the best compatibility, like easy to use, all that kind of stuff, Proton seems to be the easiest, but I'm also really not big on email these days. So take that, what I say, I guess, with email with a grain of salt, because I try to avoid using it as much as possible. Now, I'm going to mention something on PGP, because some people might choose to encrypt their emails with PGP. I just want people to be aware, for the people that don't know this, PGP only encrypts the body of the email itself. It does not encrypt the from or the to. It does not encrypt the subject line, and it does not encrypt the header for the email, because the headers are needed for email to work properly. So you can't really encrypt that stuff. So let me just give you an example of what a header on an email looks like, because I'm just using something that I previously covered on a different video where I had a email header here. This is the kind of stuff, the kind of information that's in email headers. The from, the to, the subject, the date, the sender's IP address. There's a lot of information that's in the header. So PGP is really not the greatest option if you're looking for like maximum security and privacy when you're doing email. PGP is good. Just realize that it comes with those limitations. So if there's anything that you don't want people to read, it all needs to be in the body of the email. Be careful with the rest of that stuff. And obviously don't use it for anything illegal, because with all the metadata that goes along with that not being encrypted, it's not going to be too hard to start piecing stuff together. Now, what I would recommend in the place of email where possible is to switch to some sort of a secure messaging service. There's a few different options that are available. Signal is like pretty much my favorite. I like Signal a lot. It's been tested in court. The encryption has held up. Their policies that they say about like no logging and that kind of stuff has held up. So I do like their service. Briar is another good one. And if you are wanting to use the Matrix protocol, which Matrix is good. So for example, Session is an example of something that uses the Matrix protocol. Just something for people to be aware of with Matrix is it does not support forward secrecy. So what that means is if your key ever gets compromised, then all of your messages could be read by an attacker. So just keep that in mind. I don't think it's a huge deal, just something to keep in mind. But you don't have an issue with that with something like Signal, but some people say, well, Signal requires a phone number. But there's other options, but like I said, you could just use Briar Session, or there's other options that are out there. There's other apps that use the Matrix protocol, so you could use one of those. And I put Telegram on here. I don't like Telegram for privacy, but I realize that there's a lot of people that say it's for privacy, but there are some issues with it. So they have a feature called secret chats. Now, the issue with secret chats is it only works on mobile. It does not work on desktop. And you also do not get the option to use that in group chat. So if you do not specify, like you want to go chat with someone, you specifically have to set up secret chats. It does not have that set by default, and it does not have any sort of encryption for group chats, meaning that everything can be read. And I've seen a lot of people talk about, oh, well, Telegram is a good private, secure option. No, it's not. Everything can be read by their service if they decide to. But it's like Signal, Briar, Session, all these others have managed to implement zero-knowledge encryption. So, and Telegram's been in the game for a long time. So I just want people to be aware of that. The Telegram, yes, they might have secret chats, but they are severely limited, and it's just not nearly as solid of a choice as something like Signal. So with that being said, that is going to wrap the video up. I'm going to be making more videos on this stuff. I'm going to be covering PicoCrypt, and I'll be coming back and covering some more of these messaging apps in more detail at a later point. This is just some more knowledge for you to put in your toolbox about some different options that are available so you can start dumping these privacy issue services if that's what you decide to do. Because as we've just seen with Microsoft hack, that if someone screws up on their end, on that end of the business, that everyone could potentially get all of their accounts compromised. And anyone that had an email with Microsoft, potentially the Russians might have made copies of all of the emails that they've ever sent and received. I think that's a huge issue, and it was certainly a massive foobar on Microsoft's part. But anyway, that's going to wrap the video up. I appreciate the support as always, and I will see you in the next one.